Hi and welcome to Leading Me Wee Gems. Today we are talking about from doubt to done, overcoming beliefs that block success. So what is this all about? It's all about that inner critic, that little monkey on the shoulder, that devil on the shoulder, whatever, saboteur, whatever you want to call it. We're going to be talking about that inner critic that stops you from doing and being your very best, because there isn't one of us, not one, who doesn't have an inner critic. It just depends on how well you've been able to overcome that critic. I tend to call it an inner critic rather than the saboteur, but it is the same thing. So we're going to talk about overcoming these limiting beliefs. We all have them. Normally, when I'm talking to clients and when I'm listening to great people speak, you often hear them talk about those limiting beliefs, right? We've all got them. We've all had them. And one of the things that I laugh at is we all just assume that it's only other people that just can do so many things, and I'm the one with the limiting beliefs. But in actual fact, we are all the same. So I want to talk about a few things here. I want to talk about what is the inner critic, that saboteur. What exactly is it? What are our doubts? What are they about? What are they? Also, what did they do for us? Okay. What did they not do for us? But what did they do for us? And how we can overcome those doubts and limiting beliefs. We're going to look at all of that today. So let's start. I've been working with the inner critic for years, personally myself, but I've been teaching how to silence the inner critic for years. The reason that I teach it is because I had a massive inner critic, even when I was at the top of the game, winning awards right, left and centre. I had a massive inner critic telling me I wasn't good enough. Even although I was being bestowed with honours, it was as if whatever anyone else said, it didn't matter. What I believed was I wasn't good enough because I had massive targets that I had that were pie in the sky, but I wasn't hitting those, so I wasn't good enough. So we all have these, and it's born through me having those that actually led me to depression, which I'll touch on this right now when we look at the Leading Me ladder of leadership that I always bring in and we talk about. This centre ground is when we are mastering the ego, so the ego is balanced. Wonderful to have a balanced ego, right? We need our egos. We were given them for a good reason. We can't leave them at the door or not have them anywhere. So it's good to have a balanced ego. However, we can either go into control and judgment, and that's bigging it up, or we can go to belittling, which is blame and victim. Now, you've got to imagine those who are listening, they cannot see the ladder. So if we imagine the ladder, in that middle part of us is the middle of the ladder. The ladder is a sideward ladder, so it goes one way and then it goes the other. So it's not an up and down ladder, it's a side to side ladder. So in that, what I actually done was I ended up, because I was so busy trying to control myself, I ended up down at the bottom end of victim because, when it comes to, we live in polarity. This is one of the rules of the universe. If I'm one place, I must be the other. So if I'm at one side of that ladder, I then have to go to the other side of that ladder. Okay? So I ended up in complete victim, which is mental health issues, depression. Poor me. I hate to say it because the thought of me being a victim, I just don't like. But that's where I was. Right? Poor me. People would be better off without me. I'm going to shut myself off from everyone. It was awful. Just not a nice place to be. But I do have to be thankful. I have to be really thankful to me for giving me depression, because what it did was my ego was completely out of balance. But it did bring me to my senses of trying to get it back into the middle, and it did eventuate in lots of different tools coming out of the ether through the universal forces to me because I'd been through that situation. So I'm very grateful for it. Never want to go back there. It's been coming up for 30 years since I was there, and I'm quite happy to leave it there, thanks. But I use the tools every day to keep me away from that. So to keep my ego in balance rather than it mastering me, I like to master my ego. And this is one of the tools I'm going to talk about today, which is the 4-hour release model. But that model came from what I went through and then many years of trying to work out how can I help people not get there. Eventually it came. It wasn't I just sat down and went, oh, let me just develop a model. It didn't work like that. It came through time and space and I got there eventually. But overcoming limiting beliefs was one of my biggies, and CBT was a really great help back then for me. And I realised I had caused my own depression, so I could actually help myself out of that. I don't know who wrote this. This is an unknown quote I'm going to give you, but there's a great quote that says, limiting beliefs are like chains. Break them and you set yourself free. And this is exactly what the release model is about. The 4 hours release model is about breaking free of those doubts and those limiting beliefs. So, what is the inner critic? What is the saboteur? Well, it's that little voice inside your head that keeps bringing you down, or it's the devil on your shoulder, or how you want to see it. But I see it as the voice inside the head that when I've come up against something, it will come in and say, well, you can't do that, Max. That won't work. You're not good enough. Right? That's the voice. That's the one that captures us and goes, no, that's not for you. You can't do that. Other people can, but you can't. It stops us from having a go because we don't believe it stops us. So it's my ego mastering me. And I don't want my ego to master me. I want to master my ego. And that's what leading me is all about. So what are doubts? Well, doubts are when we allow someone or some event from the past that's happened to us, that had a big impact on us, to be in the present now. Right? It's our story. It's our present story. So don't think it's in the past. This is a story that we keep reliving now. I'm not good enough because I can't do that. And that could have come from somebody in the past, your mum, your dad, whoever it was, said to you, you're not good enough. So you take it on board and that's what you believe. Okay? But the problem is it's not in the past, it is now. It's in the present. And the more you tell the story, it's in the present, it's in the present, and it's the present. Right? And the funny thing is the present is now gone, now gone, now gone. So the present's already in the past, is now here, and the present is now. So you just keep playing with the present being the past. So we can change that if we want. The thing is, sometimes we get into that steady flow of behaviour. We don't change that. So let's look at how we can overcome the doubts and the limiting beliefs. Well, there's many different ways. We can stop those by actually asking ourselves to stop and doing some meditation, stop and going away and taking some time for ourselves to, push that voice outside our heads. And we can bring ourselves back into, hang on, that was the past, it's not now. So there's lots of different ways, and we can build practices up of becoming present, which takes that pulling the past into the present, but becoming present now. We can turn to things like being appreciative of something. Let's just say we're sitting and we've got a glass of water or something that we happen to have, we can actually become present with that glass. We can think about the water that's there. We can think about the glass or the holder it's in. It could be a cup. And we can think of the people who make that. Well, I am now fully present with that cup, with that water. I'm not actually thinking. I can get rid of it that way. However, it can also be quite difficult to do, especially when we haven't built that tool up. So I teach a thing called the 4 hours release model. 4 R's. Now I know I'm Scottish sounding, so the R's is difficult for people to hear. So the 4 R's release model. So that's 4 separate R's that I use. And that is when we are able to find the word, find the phrase that we use against ourselves. We move from the negative to the positive, because when we're in negative feel, we can't think positively. Positive thinking, we've been sold a dummy on positive thinking. It never works. Well, sorry. It sometimes works, but that's usually when we're in positive feel. Then we can positive think. But we can't go from a negative feel to a positive think without feeling positive. I don't have time to go into all of this today, but I do have a webinar on this that you'll find below, free, that you can go on, and I'll teach you basically the 3 brains in our body, why positive thinking doesn't work, and how to master the 4-hour release model. So I don't really have time to go into that on this session today, but it is there for you to go and get at your convenience and see how that works for you. But I teach this model because we need to move from a negative feel to a positive feel before we can change that wording, that phrase, into something that you can believe in. Because just to say the words will not allow you just to go and believe in it. Once you have a tool like that and you work with that, it becomes really easy to silence that inner critic. But the important thing is positive feel first before positive think. So there's 4 R's that I teach, and what we have to do to go into each one, and then you can actually go and use that to free yourself from that inner critic. So when we look at that Leading Me ladder of leadership, we can talk about the fact that we are moving from one side of the ladder to the other when it comes to the ego mastering us. But when we're actually in the belittling side, that means that we can actually use the 4-hour release model to get ourselves back into that middle ground of leading me, back into that center ground. So the whole point of using this model is to help me, one, identify where I'm at the moment. Oh, I'm belittling myself. I'm talking down to myself. What do I use? I'll use the 4-hour release model because I've become aware that's where I am. If I use that model, I can get back into that center ground. Now I'm mastering the ego. But while I'm out here in that belittling side of things, the ego is mastering me. So we always want to be mastering ego. So awareness first, where am I on the ladder of leadership, followed by back in the middle ground by using some tool like the 4-hour release model. And by using that 4-hour release model, that third R, that's the one that pulls us straight back into that centre ground. But only when we're actually in that positive feel. When we rephrase it, that's when we pull ourselves back into the middle ground. The 4-hour release model. The first R that we come to is that we recognise. That's the first R. We need to first recognise what the phrase, what the word is, followed by, the second R is we need to reward ourselves. That's when we move into that positive feel. Now, to do that, guys, you can't skip this. For many, many years, my clients would come back after me teaching on this, and they come back and say, how'd you get on with the 4-hour release model? And they'd say, yeah, it was good. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And well, that told me it wasn't working. So it's not working. Oh, no, well, it did. Right, well, it did. No, it didn't. And that was because they found it difficult going into that reward centre. And I teach that on the webinar. We need to find our way into that reward centre. If we don't move from negative feel, so we can't go into positive feel. Then when we come to that third R, which is rephrase, we cannot rephrase into the positive. Okay? It's just not possible. We can't get there when we're in that negative feel, because we're not going to believe anything we say. Right? Even though we're saying it, we're not going to believe it. So we need the positive feel in that reward centre. And then we can rephrase into the positive. And then that fourth R is repeat. So that's the 4R release model. Simple model, but there's a lot more to understanding how you get through that. So my advice is, if you've got an hour to spare, go and do the webinar. It's wonderful to have. I do these live every so often, so I might have a live one. If I have a live one, that will be down below, so you'll be able to go and join us when it's there. So it's easy for people to say, oh, just push that voice out, that saboteur, that little voice in your head, that monkey in your mind, whatever you want to call it, that inner critic, just move it out. Yeah, that's easier said than done. But if I've got a tool like the 4R release model, I'm able to then move myself back into that centre ground. Now, I am the one who is leading me in the full sense of I am leading my ego. I am mastering my ego and taking charge to bring it back to centre so that I can actually do whatever I need and I want to do. I can have a go now. I can do what I've really wanted to do rather than have some little voice holding me back. Right? And that little voice is a booming big voice. We think it's a little, but it's a booming, because if it can stop us from being at our best, then that ain't a good voice to have. And eventually what happens is that voice disappears because there's no stimulus for it, because we keep cutting it out using the 4R release model, and it gets to the point where the ego sort of lets it go and goes, well, what's the point? Because she's not going to listen to me. And that's the whole point of it. I'm mastering the ego, not the ego mastering me. So I'll leave you with a thought from me on the inner critic. The inner critic feeds off of our fears and doubts. We need to move from negative to positive feel before we can starve the beast. And if you need a bit more help on this, then go to the show notes, go to the description below, and you will find a little link that will take you to the free webinar that will help you master your ego and get back into that centre ground of leading me by using the 4R's release model. As always, stay true, stay you, and keep bringing out your brilliance. Bye for now.